Everyone, welcome back and welcome to our last plenary for the day. We hope you have had all experienced many fruitful and inspiring sessions and interactions. To end our first day exploring rights in the landscape, we are excited to welcome 6 innovative communicators to the stage, each bringing a unique perspective and approach to how we can challenge and change narratives that no longer serve our shared vision and mission. We want to remind you to visit Slido and enter the event code GLF 2019 to be able to engage further in the themes and questions of our plenary sessions. And also, don't forget to share your thoughts via social media. Use the hashtag GLF Bonn 2019 or thinklandscape.
So now, before we introduce our moderator for this plenary session, we have a very exciting video to show you, so please pay attention.
In this world. At the same time I learn, there is a new awakening. There is a revival, a tribal revival. My people are rising up and take our positions as the gatekeepers of the land. Modernism and capitalism, which infiltrate our culture, make it hard to hear. But the ancient sun is different from other suns. It can be heard over noises and ongoing debate that bury everything else. Even when it's not shouting, even if it's just a whisper, or the subnations of the names of our elders, brothers, and sisters. Even our loudest voices can be heard over all intimidation when it's telling the truth. Is there any place for us in this world? We will find it. We will make it.
All right, so now it is our biggest pleasure to welcome on stage Emanuela Shinta, who is the CEO and Executive Director of the Ronald Wellum Foundation, who will moderate this session.
Thank you. During this time, I always experience the situations when people that I met in any kind of meeting or conference couldn't recognize me until I mentioned my name. Hi, I'm Emanuela Shinta. And they were like, hi, you are Emanuela Shinta. We couldn't recognize you because you cut your hair, because you changed your style. I experienced it a lot of times. And a week before I was flying from Indonesia to Germany, I was really considering and thinking hard. Should I cut my hair? What if people cannot recognize me and, feeling of being forgotten, not recognized is not an easy feeling to bear. And finally, I did it. But this is the truth. Deep in our hearts, as a human being, we always have this desire to be known and to be remembered by others in a certain way, just like what we want. And my people, Dayak indigenous communities, want to be known not only as the scary headhunters tribe, but as the guardians of the forest, guardians of Borneo forest. And that's why a few days before I was flying to Germany to attend this Global Landscape Forum in Bonn, I decided to cut my hair with the shortest trim that I have ever had in my life, because I want to be known, I want to be remembered, not only as a woman with long hair that always wear the traditional outfit whenever she appears at Global Landscape Forum. I want to be remembered as someone who is brave, who is courageous, and determined to bring the voices of my people and change the world's perspective toward our people. That's my purpose. And my story is only a little piece of the global narratives that are happening around us every day. But somehow, I want to highlight that the global change perspective will happen only when every single person is willing to change. And this can be challenging, and there can be a tension as well. And maybe there will be a lot of debate and disagreement about that. But that's okay, because that's why we gather here today. And that's why we will listen to the amazing presentations by amazing speakers that will be sharing their perspective on the narrative that they are working on, and they want to recreate, reshape, and to challenge that. And I just want to give little reminders about the Slido things that have been mentioned by the MC. So I would like to engage everyone also to involve on that, to vote for the answers of the Slido questions, which is the most effective approach for changing the narrative. You can see on the slide. Please vote once. We would love to hear your opinions and your thoughts about it. Well, okay. Now, I would like to invite our first speaker, the amazing one. She is the Strategy Director of International Agency Futura, which specializes in branding, strategy, behavior change, and consumer campaigns in the field of sustainability. She previously worked at Greenpeace International and studied at the University of Toronto and the University of London. Please welcome Hilary Tam.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to try and find the clicker. I think this is it. Hi, everyone. My name is Hilary. I'm from Futura. We are an independent, mission-driven change agency based out of London, but we also have offices in New York, Stockholm, and Mexico City. So our mission is all around making sustainability so desirable that it becomes normal. And the way we kind of work through that is this approach that we like to call logic and magic. So we work across the logic of sustainability strategy to make sure that everything we do has an impact, but we also work across the magic of creative communications, because without those really compelling, inspiring messages, some of those strategies will never see the light of day. And that's how we work with some of the biggest brands and clients around the world to really create change. If you want to find out more about how we do that, come find me later. But today, I'm here to talk to you about the power of story. One of my favorite books right now, or has been my favorite book for quite some time, is *Sapiens* by Yuval Harari. And one of the big ideas is around the fact that Homo sapiens have risen to the top because our ability to really craft stories and to really gather people to believe in things that are pretty much made up in our imagination. So think about religion, think about the idea of nation states, the concept of money, the concept of human rights. All of that is actually created by us. And the power of storytelling isn't new. Plato has said that storytellers are going to be the people who rule society, and that stories are really the education of heroes. So think about the stories that are around us today. They haven't really been helpful in helping us face some of the most challenging problems of our time, such as climate change, resource scarcity, inequality. In fact, some of these stories have actually created more division amongst us, when really what we need is collaboration, partnership. What we need is coming together to address some of these issues. So how do we rewrite or craft stories that are really going to help us ensure a future that is one where people and planet can really thrive? So I'm just going to spend the next few minutes talking through 3 ways of how we're really doing this at Futerra. The first one is changing the narrative from the feeling of fear and despair to one of hope and action. So when you think about climate change, these are some of the headlines that you see. And fair enough, climate change is a very scary, big issue. The consequences are great, and urgent action is needed right now. Without undermining the challenge at hand, we really need to understand that actually optimism in this case is essential, because hope beats fear every time. And that's the kind of attitude we really need to take forward to make sure we progress in such an issue like this, so that we don't get bogged down by doom and gloom. And the problem is, what we hear when we were doing our research was that more than half of the respondents have said that they are surrounded by these negative stories of climate change, rather than some of the positive stories of how we're actually making an impact on this issue. But when we dug a little bit deeper, a really interesting insight appeared, which is despite the bad news, people are still very optimistic. We still believe that we can and we will make an impact on reducing climate change. So this is why we created the campaign Climate Optimists, and we launched it at Climate Action Week in New York, which happens every year, because solving climate change starts with the belief that we can. So the campaign is just full of optimistic messages, headlines, the magic, but backed with powerful logic of stats and facts. So you have, because the sun is hiring, but jobs in solar energy increased 17 times faster than any other industry in the US. And in 2016, humanity doubled its use of solar energy. So you can see the really powerful logic, but with the magic of communications that's really compelling and drives people to action. The next one I really want to talk to you about is shifting the balance from powerful people to people power. So I'm sure you're all aware of the Sustainable Development Goals. Businesses and governments have done a great job in taking these on board and really driving action. But there's been one predominant voice that's been missing, and that's the voice of individuals like you and me. So the first reason is because leaders don't think that people can change their behaviors, and even if they do, it's not going to make that much of a difference. That is very wrong. We've seen this time and time again with the rise of vegetarianism, the use of seatbelts. These are behaviors that people are doing that have an impact on the health and safety of people and planet each and every day. The other reason why we're missing the individual voice is because people think that if we are putting responsibility on people, then businesses and government, who should be doing all the heavy lifting, is going to be let off the hook, and we can't have that. Well, let me tell you something. In my work and experience with Futerra and beyond, businesses and government care so much around what people think. Look at the awareness and outrage around plastic pollution and how quickly action followed after. And the incredible youth activism and the work of Extinction Rebellion, and now how many countries and businesses around the world are declaring a climate emergency. So that's not true. And that's why we created the Good Life Goals, because for the Sustainable Development Goals to be reached, everyone needs to play a part. The private sector, government, civil society, and people like you, people like us, all 7.5 billion of us, because people power matters just as much as powerful people. And I think you know that already because we've done some surveys and more than, 96% of people believe that their personal actions can make an impact. The problem is we just need to know what those actions are, the kind of very impactful collective actions that people can take around the world. And that's what the Good Life Goals are about. We've taken the 17 SDGs and translated them into easy actions that are based on the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, so they map back to impact that everyone can take. The final one that I'm just going to touch on really quickly is shifting the narrative around sustainability from niche to norm and making that a cultural norm, mainstreaming it. So sustainability, social, environmental, has really permeated the business community. A lot of companies are talking about it because consumers are demanding it, their employees internally are demanding it, but it's in this bubble. And when I first started in sustainability, that bubble was even smaller. To drive the large-scale change that we need to address some of the challenges we're facing, we need to break out of these bubbles. And we really need to embrace popular culture and really mainstream some of these conversations. And who better to do that with than the film and television industry, right? Every day they connect with millions, billions of people. So there's a really good opportunity there to really engage people, to change mindsets, and to normalize sustainable behaviors, which is why we worked with BAFTA, the British Academy for Film and Television Arts, on this project called Planet Placement. And we know it's possible. We've seen it before because, for example, smoking. That conversation has really been pushed forward by film and television with them actively taking it off the screen or writing into storylines, people quitting smoking. This old TV show back in the 80s, Cheers, they coined the term designated driver, and as a result in the US, fatalities because of drunk driving has completely reduced as it became a popular concept across primetime TV. And most recently, I don't know if anyone watches this show, Love Island, which is a reality dating show in the UK, very, very popular, high viewership. Every frame basically has a character using a reusable water bottle. And last summer, the reusable water bottle became the item of the summer, the accessory of the summer. So really kind of making sustainable behaviors a norm and making it desirable. It's also a great opportunity for film and television because we know people care about the environment and about tackling climate change. So it's really about telling the stories of our generation. And there's been a lot of great documentaries and films already doing this. We just really want to inspire the industry to do more. So that's what Planet Placement is about. So I think, this is why rewriting stories is so important and focusing on shifting the narratives of what we want to see, what we want to believe is the future that is full of hope and inspiration, because to save life on Earth, we need to believe we can. So I invite all of you to find the courage, the love, the hope that you have inside you, and do what we like to do best at Futerra, which is imagine better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilary. That's amazing presentation. All right, I have to walk quickly. Thank you. All right, the next speakers are the co-founders of I See a Different You. A See a Different You blog is a blog that transforms preconceptions about Soweto townships in Johannesburg, South Africa. And the founders felt that Soweto was perceived as a site of poverty and unrest due to media representations resulting from mass protests that occurred in the area under apartheid in 1970. The blog has become a platform that is changing the way the world sees Africa through film and photography depicting landscapes, fashions, and regional stories. Please welcome Innocent Mukhali and Vuyo Pancha.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
We are from I See a Different You, and we are so thankful to come through here, to be invited and share our story and see this part of the world. Cool.
So we will tell you where it all started and how we got to be here in front of you. So this is where we come from. We come from Soweto. So Soweto is a township in South Africa. It's got over 1.2 million people.
Yeah. And it's mostly known for the negative which the media portrays about it. It's known for the uprising, June 16. It's known for the struggles. It's also known for where Mandela grew up and a lot of champions and struggle heroes that saved us from apartheid.
So the biggest problem we had was when you tell people you are from Soweto, they always thought of these pictures. It's either crime, June 16, poverty, or hungry kids. So we did not like that narrative because everywhere you go, people tell you that, and you are from Soweto, but that's not all there is to it. So we wanted to change the perception of Soweto. So how could we do that? So what we did is he went to Kenya.
Yeah, I first went out of South Africa to go shoot a commercial for Coca-Cola. And when I got there, I had a perception of what Kenya was, which was also a negative perception of it. I thought it was a jungle. And when I got there, it was metropolitan. It was beautiful. And I saw this amazing guy driving a cool bike, and I just thought, wow, okay, Kenya is not what I think it is. And we need to start changing the narrative and also changing perceptions of what people think of Africa. Because the problem is not just Soweto, it's not just where we are from, where people think people are killing each other, or it's a jungle, or it's whatever. It's also the whole of Africa. We need to start telling our own stories.
Cool. So he sent this picture to us. We did not believe it was in Kenya. We're like, you're lying. This is not Kenya. People in Kenya are not this cool. And it was wrong because we've been fed that so much that we thought Kenya couldn't be like this. And then I See a Different You started. So we realized that there is importance in telling your own story, because if you don't tell your own story, someone else will and you won't like it. So we started to tell our own stories through photography. And you know, we childhood memories that we used, the things we used to do growing up, you know, these are things that you never see. You only see kids hungry or kids with broken shoes. But we used to play kites. You know, this is us. And what we did is we decided to shoot it panorama, so that when you see the picture, you don't only just see us, but you feel the environment in it as well. You know, like the picture's moving.
And then fashion was a very important element of our photography, still is. Also, the environment can be as grungy as it can be, but if the person looks decent and is very styling, the image changes to be more interesting and appealing, and people would want to know where that place is.
Yeah. So we realized that, okay, when we started shooting, people were liking it and they were telling us, you know, come to Ghana, come to Tanzania, come to Nigeria. And that's when we realized that, you know, we need to tell people that Africa is not just a country. You know, so we started going to different places. This is Senegal. Innocent there on the top left. He used to be sexy, but not anymore now.
Also, with our imagery, we wanted to show the pride that comes with being an African person. Africa is not just full of snotty-nosed kids and dust, you know. It's full of creativity. It's full of young, vibrant people who want to change the world and tell their own stories. So with the images, we wanted people to also identify themselves in the photos. Hence, we never had captions on them. We'll just say Senegal 2009, Senegal whatever, or wherever we go. And then people will tell their own story through the images we are taking.
And people would come to us and be like, but then there's also like the poverty and what. And we also say, we agree with you, but like there's positive and negative in everything, and we choose to see the positive because the negative has been done so much. So we decided to just show people the positive side of Africa.
And with...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With the power of the internet, we were able to show beyond the people around us. We shared this on our Facebook, on our Tumblr, on the times before Instagram was around, and people could see live and see the world we are living in. And we inspired a lot of other people, younger and older, to start to be proud of who they are and share their own stories and tell their own stories. And I see a difference. You became beyond just a blog of cool guys taking photos. It became a movement of people sharing their own beauty, looking at the positive in life and sharing it online.
And you can see that picture with the mother holding her baby. It's just strong motherhood. That's just Africa. And then from Africa to the world. So we can't be taking pictures the whole day and traveling. We need to have a business. So what we decided to do is we wanted to fuse our passion with our business. And there's nothing that moves whatever message you have more than advertising, because advertising has the budget. They put everything in billboards, they put it in TV, in radio. So we wanted to position our business in that way. So this was a commercial we did in 2014, where most of the time they tell you who is amazing. There'll be clients who will be like, no, we want this guy because he's an influencer or he's an amazing painter. But then we switched it and we got people that were not amazing at the time to the world. But then we told the world that this is who's amazing for us now. And because of most of the time people tell you who's amazing, and then people in Africa will be like, oh, he's amazing because they love him in the world. So we shot this in 2014. Oh, there's no sound.
Okay, I think...
Oh, okay, so essentially this guy, he was a painter. He's a painter, still is. We shot him in 2014. His name is Nelson Makamo. And, you know, last year or this year...
This year he was on the Time magazine.
Yeah, he's one of the first African artists to be on the Time magazine, like the youngest on the front cover. So with that, we just realized that, you know, if we believe in our people and our stories and we encourage each other a lot, the people will take notice and then they'll start taking it and using it. So it was nice with sound. And this one will also need sound. So this is a commercial we did as well, just to push that whole I see a different you manifesto of, like, you know, just to be, being African is cool, you know.
Also, so the commercial is called TIA, and TIA is short of This is Africa, and it was used as a negative connotation to say, if you see a pothole, you say this is Africa. If you see a car crash or load shedding, there's no electricity, you go, this is Africa. And then we wrote this advert to change the message of This is Africa to a positive spin, where we said, we show kids working hard, and you say, the message says, kids are starving in Africa, and the starving is not them starving, it's the hunger and passion of what they do. You know, and you see a lady wearing a leopard print, and we say, they say animals roll around here, and this is a beautiful lady wearing a leopard print dress, and she's modeling.
Oh, here, it's playing now.
Okay, it'll save us talking.
Say Africa's a dark continent. So dark. We agree. They say we're always shooting each other. Of course. They say kids are hungry here. We know. Yes. Starving. So hungry. They say we live in the bush. It's true. So true. So true. We love a rose bush. Flowers. And that we look to the world for inspiration. is Africa, but not as they see it, rather as we know it.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. It's so inspiring. I can relate to you. Oh my gosh. I feel my blood is hot now, burning. All right, the next speaker. Also amazing speaker. He's the president of the Native American Journalists Association and serves as an associate editor for tribal affairs at High Country News. He has reported for PBS NewsHour, Frontline, National Native News, NPR, Al Jazeera America, National Geographic. His stories have won multiple honors, including investigative awards from Public Radio News Directors Incorporated and the Gannett Foundations. Please welcome Tristan Aton.
Gutpaigya Matenki, one who teaches with a newspaper. The words that we use and the words that we use to define ourselves matter. I work as a reporter, and that means that the work that I do is often the same as many of my other colleagues. But I'm also an indigenous person, which means that I do things just a little bit differently. I'm Kiowa. We're a nomadic horse people who live on the plains in the United States. And our ways of storytelling and preserving history are what inform my work. My father is a doctor. My grandfather and my great-grandfather were teachers. One of my great-great-grandfathers was a medicine man or a doctor. And one of my other great-great-grandfathers was one of 24 Kiowa prisoners of war that was jailed at the end of the Red River War in the 1870s for resisting U.S. imperialism on the plains. I come from a line of healers, teachers, and people who are dedicated to their communities. And I knew that when I became a reporter that my work would have to live up to those same standards. I thought that through radio, television, or print that I would be able to serve my community. Unfortunately, when I got to mainstream media, I found that that wasn't true. Except for a handful of outlets, most editors were very interested in indigenous stories, but only if they had something to do with plight or something that was inherently negative. Dying language stories, for instance. You can sell a dying language story in a heartbeat to an editor just about anywhere in the country. But if you want to write about budget cuts to Indian Health Service, our healthcare system in the U.S. that serves indigenous communities, those are much, much harder to get through and into mainstream media. I've stopped counting the number of times that people have asked me to write about domestic violence, addiction, or suicide, and I won't even respond to emails from people who want me to write about poverty in Indian country. So what exactly is going on in the journalism industry? Why is there such a focus on negative stories? It's a complicated question, but essentially journalism is rooted in colonialism. This is how it works. Stories are resources. So non-indigenous reporters often come to indigenous communities. They harvest and gather those stories from indigenous communities. Those non-indigenous reporters process those stories in the way that fits their stereotypes and their ideas of our communities, and then they are put into non-native magazines and outlets and sold to non-indigenous people and audiences. The message is basically always the same, is that indigenous people are backwards, not able to adjust to modern society, and headed toward extinction. Essentially, Western journalism is an extractive industry, And what reporters are doing are profiting off of our pain and selling it to audiences. A few years ago, I turned to an elder named Dorothy Whitehorse DeLawn and asked her what the word for reporter was in my language, in the Kiowa language. And what she said was, Gutpaya Matain Ki, one who teaches with a newspaper. So it was in that moment that I realized how important language is in how we think about ourselves. It defines what we do, who we are, and most importantly, when it comes to the work that I do, it describes why we do what we do. What it does is provides a blueprint to understand not only the past, but also the future. So take, for example, this image here from Kiowa artist, historian, and journalist Silverhorn. This is a record of events. It's a form of journalism that's using the technology and techniques of the time. So casual observers often see this as art, but to Kiowas, this is our history. It's written by one of antiquity's greatest historians, and it's a recording of events that is important to us, not to outsiders. It's this tradition that informs the work that I do. At High Country News, we are the only non-native outlet in the United States that has a desk that is dedicated to covering indigenous communities. The only outlet in the country that is dedicated to reporting in indigenous communities. We're not counting indigenous outlets, only non-native outlets. But of the thousands of media outlets, we're the only ones who do this, which absolutely blows my mind. But at High Country News, we are focused on reporting for indigenous communities, not about. So we're focused on stories about sports, elections. We're talking about film, art, sex, technology, all of the things that our family and our friends are talking about because we live and work in our own communities. And when we write for our communities, what we find is two things. The first is that we're informing other tribal members and tribal citizens. We're talking about the same things that our own friends are talking about. But the other thing that we find that when we're doing this work in this manner is that we're educating non-indigenous journalists about the indigenous world, about how big, complex, and beautiful our worlds actually are. We essentially teach that the old models of Western journalism aren't welcome in Indian country. So what we do is we aim to disrupt patterns, we decolonize newsrooms, and we bring the change that we want to see. And we do this at the Native American Journalism Association by thinking about a future that is rooted in our traditions that we can hold right now in our hands in the present day. So the question that I'm always asking is, what do you want to be? Do you want to be a journalist, or do you want to be something else? So, Gutpagya Matemki, the words that we use to describe ourselves are what matter. Thank you.
Well, our last speaker, but of course not the least, is the amazing woman who is recognized globally for her role in spearheading and shaping the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. She has been a widely recognized player in helping to shape the international climate change regime. And she also leads RARE's emerging global portfolio on climate change with a special emphasis on networking and scaling community-led solutions for adaptations and mitigations in Colombia, Brazil, China, Indonesia, Mozambique, the Philippines, and small islands developing states across Micronesia. Prior to joining RARE, she worked on a broad range of sustainable development issues within the United Nations Development Program, the Colombian government, multilateral banks, NGOs, other civil societies, organizations, and the private sectors. And most recently, she also served as a global director of the World Resource Institute Climate Program. And prior to that, she also served as a senior director of the World Bank's Global Practice for Environment and Natural Resources. Please welcome Paula Caballero.
Hello. I have a very daunting challenge here because I'm between you and the reception. So I hope that the story I come to share with you is captivating. And I'm really delighted to share the stage with such amazing narratives and storytellers and an audience out there that I know is also very good at creating narratives. So let me start off by saying that narratives are important and they're very powerful. We are hardwired to understand the world and to learn through narratives and through storytelling. And done right, narratives are about empowering and validation and shining a light on what works. But there's another side to it, because narratives can also be about entrenching a specific world vision, about validating what we already want to validate. Think confirmation bias. We tend to look for confirmation of what we already believe. Or think status quo bias. We tend to go for the default option. We don't want to rock the boat. And there's deep lessons there for where we are right now and for the agendas that we are trying to move. So I wanted to share with you a story from that SDG journey that was alluded to. So back in 2010, as some of us were starting to think about the UN Conference on Sustainable Development, Rio+20, we were faced with an agenda that had been defined, which was incredibly bureaucratic and mattered to no one. And this at a moment when we already saw that as humans, we were breaching every single planetary boundary, and we had no plan for action. We had no call for action. So Colombia, we looked around and thought, what has worked? And there's thousands of resolutions, of decisions, of decade of this and year of that, and none of that has moved the needle. Actually, the only thing that we saw that really had galvanized action were the MDGs. And they had actually created a very powerful narrative about collective action and for eradicating poverty, and collective action for tackling some of the most pressing social issues. And it had worked. So we said, let's build on the MDGs. Let's move that forward. But the MDGs were not up for the task. We needed a new framework because the MDGs were narrow and they were disconnected and not up to the task of the complexities of development. Importantly, they were only addressing also developing nations and not really tackling the 1% of humanity that consumes the majority of the world's resources. And that doesn't work, and that's not equitable. So Colombia proposed that in Rio+20, countries of the world adopt this thing called the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. But I want to underline that the SDGs were not inevitable. We created a narrative, we created an agenda, a metric about a functional, integrated, equitable world in which everybody, all countries, all peoples had to step up and change. And this posed a threat to many. It was widely dismissed, and those that did not dismiss it as an absurd proposition hated it. Developed countries hated it because the MDGs was a discrete and simple agenda that was easy to address, and it did not involve them. And developing countries hated it because they were fearful that the MDGs would simply die out and that there were all sorts of perverse conditionalities embedded in the SDG agenda. So changing a narrative is difficult, and this was a revolutionary narrative. So there's two lessons from that. The first, don't give up. Be relentless when you want to have a narrative that really changes the paradigm, and be bold. For months, Colombia was in the wilderness. We walked the halls of the UN and had proposals, propositions, working groups, trying to galvanize that action. And we never, ever gave up. And guess what? Slowly, there started to be a buzz. Slowly, countries, constituents, colleagues started to come forward and to embrace it. Then, in August, Guatemala endorsed it. So finally, it was 2 countries. And then other countries endorsed it. And then in November, enough countries had told the UN that they wanted the SDGs, that they were part of the negotiating text for Rio Plus 20. And that's what clinched it. That's when the SDGs were really starting to be born. So what was important about this was that the Colombian proposal, then Guatemala, with Peru, with UAE, with everybody that joined, all the constituencies, all the groups that joined and supported, we called out the MDGs for what they were. An agenda that had galvanized amazing action, but it was still an agenda that was minimal and not up to the complexities of development. What we dared to imagine, and that was the dramatic new narrative, was a world in which there was a spectrum of development, in which all countries, all peoples had a place in that development spectrum and had their own challenges and had their own opportunities. But it was also a revolution in responsibility, because it meant that all peoples and all countries also had to step up to act, very much along the lines of what Hillary was saying at the very beginning in her first intervention. It was an acknowledgement that unless we all acted together, we were not going to be able to ensure the long-term well-being of people and planet. And that, at that moment, was a revolution. That was then clinched a couple of years, or if you're looking at 2015, a couple of months later, with Paris, which reinforced that agenda, the idea of an agenda of universal equity. But I want to underline, as we gather in the GLF, as across the town they gather at the UN, that these are all fascinating, powerful agendas, but they are still promises, and we have to turn them into action. So how do we move from narrative to impact, to that implementation that we want? Very much along the call that Hillary had at the beginning. We already have, for many decades, a toolkit, a traditional toolkit that we use. So to change practices and behaviors, we write laws, we levy fines when there's bad behavior, we provide material rewards for good behavior, we do a lot of campaigns and awareness raising. And mind you, all of that is really good, and it's very necessary, but it's not enough. Because at the heart of Rare's proposition is that we are not homo economicus, that behavior science teaches us that we are very much driven, not by logic and not by reason. That if we want to change people's minds, we have to change people's hearts. We need to have a completely different approach that builds and understands what makes this weird species, human beings, actually think and behave. And that's what Rare has done. We're bringing together and proposing a toolkit that can enhance that traditional toolkit that we have, but really founded on what makes human beings tick. So let me share with you 5 simple elements of that toolkit. The first is that if people are the problem, they are also the solution. Secondly, emotions are far more powerful than reason. Look at the wonderful narratives that our colleagues have shared and the emotions they arise and how that really captivates us. We are social animals. We model ourselves on those that we trust. So changing individual behavior is also about changing social norms. How choices are designed matters. Remember that status quo bias that I mentioned at the beginning? We tend to go for the default option. Imagine if working together we could make it so that the default option is a sustainable option. And most important, the key to all of this, to unlocking this potential, is empowered local communities, which fortunately is something that we have seen resonating in the discussions in these halls for today, and I know tomorrow will be the same. So RARE is taking that approach. We have several programs around the world, but we're embarking on an interesting journey in Colombia, applying this behavioral science to agricultural practices and land use. We're embarking in a peace process in Colombia, and that often opens huge possibilities for radical ways of supporting rural communities. But it is also urgently a need to change social norms. And let me just give you one example. Say the word baldío. If you say baldío to any Colombian, the image that comes to mind immediately is of a useless wasteland, unproductive, with which you have to do something. Well, baldíos are actually our natural lands, the ones that everybody wants to visit. Unique ecosystems of amazing biodiversity. But Colombians have been taught that unless humans intervene to make the land productive, it is not productive. So how do you change that? And changing that is vital. It's changing practices, expectations, technical assistance, and mindsets. And that's what we want to set out to do. That's what we're doing in Colombia. We're also, in these times of transition, behavioral sciences teaches us that it's a unique opportunity for turning things around. So we want, and we're working with front runners, with the leaders, with farmers, with extension services that have catalyzed and identified what are the practices and the shifts, and bringing in behavioral sciences to take it to scale, to replicate, to take it to other communities, to inform decision makers. I would just like to finalize by saying that for me, changing the narrative is really not about looking at what is possible, but about really shifting and understanding what is needed and then how to make it happen. It's very much along the lines of what our friends from South Africa have shared. I think we have to really use narratives to be radical. And right now, in the juncture where we are right now, that is the call that we must heed. Using the narratives to be as radical as we can, to bring about and fast-track the solutions that we need in a way that there's real uptake and that really resonates. And that's what will ensure that nature and people thrive today and tomorrow. Thank you.
I stay here. All right, thank you so much for amazing presentations. And yeah, I would like to invite also other speakers to come up on the stage because we will have discussions. I hope we still have time for discussions. Well, it seems like you sit there, I sit here. It's like very far away. Hi. Hello. But you know, it's very interesting. Like for me, about this plenary is when I listen to the presentations from other speakers, I really learned a lot of things. A lot of things. I would say that, like from Hillary, I make the note here about the power of storytelling and the importance to be optimist. And that's really true. I mean, like many times in my life, sometimes I feel discouraged, you know, like pessimistic, and then like, oh yeah, to make a change, we have to be optimists. And from Innocence and Vuyo, I also make the notes about how the importance of the pride of being who you are, and it's a power to change the stigma. And from Tristan's presentations, I really learned about it's very important to ask ourselves why you do what you do. I mean, it really hits me, Tristan, personally. And when we talk about indigenous people, it's not just about indigenous people, but for indigenous people. And we need to bring the change that we want to see. And from Paula, wow, it's amazing. I really love what you say. It's to change people's minds. We need to change people's heart. And that's really true. And we have to do it in radical way. So let's have a discussion here. I know like we're short of times, but I just want to ask like one key questions, which may be a bit provocative, but I think it's very important because our team in GLF Bonn here is the rights in the landscape. So according to your perspective and opinions about these rights in the landscape, what narratives that now we are facing and it needs to be changed, and what can be done? I would like to invite every speakers to share about it, and what do you think about it? I believe like every one of us here want to listen about this thing, rights in the landscape. So who want to start first?
We'll give it to the elders.
All right, Innocent and Buyo.
So what can be done? I think if anything can be done, as long as you do it, because it's always easy to sit down and say, they are saying this or they are doing that. But I feel like just do it, get up if whatever it is that you need to do it, yeah, just take the first step.
Take the first step.
Yeah. It's also, I also feel like if there's need for change in your environment and you keep quiet, you're as good as the person that's contributing to make it worse. So the importance of acting towards a thing is vital, and it also motivates everyone around you. In our circumstance, it's mainly, let's say, in growing up in Soweto, where people had stigmas of Soweto being a place where you'll see a dead body, you'll get your car jacked, you'll get all of this. If we never, and the other people around us never stood up and say, guys, Soweto is cool, man, none of that stuff happens. Yes, there is. It's not just all of that happens around Soweto. There's more in Soweto than just theft, crime, and all of that. Because every place you go to, every neighborhood or village or township has crime, has poverty, has all those things. But there's also beautiful stories, love stories. There's talent. There's beyond just the negative things around that. And the media feeds on negative. So as the people of where we are and where we're from, it's important to also speak positive of, without saying too much.
Plenary, what do you think about it?
So I think the narrative that I would like to change most is the one around that we have this choice to make. The choice between caring for people and planet and the choice of living a good life. And that's not a real choice. And I think that's the narrative that we really want to shift. And I really relate to when Futerra was first founded 18 years ago, it was very much around the fact that when our co-founders talked about sustainability, they heard lots of, that sentiment around worthiness, sacrifice, compromise, instead of excitement, opportunity, or innovation. And so I think really flipping that narrative and seeing the challenge we have at hand, of course it's very daunting, but it's also really exciting because we get a chance to really reinvent, redesign, and recreate things that haven't been serving people and planet to new ways of doing things that are more suited to where we are now. I think Paula, one of the principles you had, which is around human genius, has really gotten us into this mess. We can get ourselves out of it. And I think this whole sentiment, especially with the good life goals, is that even if you don't feel like you can do everything, it doesn't mean you can't do anything. And it starts with those first steps. So I personally want to try to be that living, breathing example that you can live well and be good to people and planet. Just be more considered in your decisions and do what you can. And don't let that daunting task be a barrier to get started.
I really love what you say. It's like someone cannot do all things, but everyone always can do something, right?
Yeah, it all adds up.
So that's why we are here, right? Because everyone needs to play their roles. Tristan, what do you think is the narratives that need to be changed to rise of the landscape?
Well, I think when it comes to narrative change, one of the things that we're always focused on at Native American Journalists Association is training and supporting the next generation of Indigenous reporters. It's incredibly important that we have Native reporters in newsrooms across the country who are able to report on these stories. Reporting on rights is a cornerstone to reporting in Indigenous communities because as it is in the United States and other places in the world, our rights are being attacked on a regular basis in many, many different ways. And one of the most, maybe one of the best ways to actually be able to get those stories out are having people who know those stories and can report on them accurately and ethically. We don't find that a lot of non-native reporters are able to do that kind of work, but we do see all the time that our own reporters do it very, very well. So when it comes to narrative change, I think from where we come from NAJA, is that we have to be supporting the right people to do those stories.
Interesting. And, like, it's just coming to my mind, maybe Paula wants to respond to this. That, like, when we talk about all the problems that are happening, especially like about climate change and the rights and the landscape, some people, like, let's say from indigenous community, I'm an indigenous, and we will say, the solutions is through bottom-up approach. Things like that. And it should be like empowering local communities. Local communities need to take the lead because they are at the front line of that. They are living in the rainforest. And we also heard like a lot of these opinions and perspectives that say, oh no, it should be balanced. Like it cannot be done only by bottom-up approach or things like that. So sometimes we can find like the tension between the indigenous communities and the non-indigenous communities. So I don't know who wants to respond to that, but I believe we come here because we want to see the new perspective, how we see that,
Well, just building on what you're saying, I think that what's really important is to not keep having environmental issues be seen as something absolutely separate, and you slot that into a silo, and then you talk about bottom-up approaches, and you talk about traditional communities or indigenous communities, and it's somehow a part of this sort of bucket of optional things on the side. And really, and I think it's very sort of the other side of the coin of what Hillary was saying about it not being sort of this Manichaean choice between you either live a comfortable life or you take care of this thing called the environment. But if we start to be able to really have that more holistic understanding, then the mindset and the understanding of what we are tackling changes. And then you can really see that indigenous communities, traditional communities, are, if you will, the stakeholders of different kinds of assets. And we start to think about natural capital in a completely different way. And that leads to a journey which ends in something else that was mentioned here, which is that individual action matters. And it's not just that it's bottom up or top down, it's the sort of all of the above approach, because you're not creating these silos. And that was really the key idea behind the SDGs, was to enable people to look at development as a complete spectrum and not as these silos. And if you look at that, then there's room for action by different levels. And doesn't matter if it's top down or bottom up, because they need to be complementary. But it's also an agenda of deep and powerful empowerment. And I think that that's something that we need to take forward. And I like very much this message of optimism. Rare has a message around pride also. We do pride campaigns. And that's really what I think can shift.
Wow. Do you want to make any comments? Do you want to make any comments on that? Or Tristan, do you want to make any comments on that?
Oh, I thought we were...
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah,
Agree.
Yeah, totally agree.
Totally agree. All right. Okay, so you mentioned also about the Slido. Let's check what we got from the Slido post that we put in the beginning. Okay, let's see that. Wow. Which is the most effective approach for changing the narrative? Empower people to tell their own story. And yeah, challenge power imbalance, focus on the positive, not the negative, change media headlines and mindset, be creative, and hear more voices. And I think like every one of us here really play our role. Like we have these amazing speakers share their story, and we also have amazing audience here, right? Because they listen. That's also the part of very important actions in changing the narrative. All right, I think we are round out of time. I noticed now it's 7:20, but before we close these sections, I would like to invite every speaker to share your final remarks from our discussions and presentations today. Whatever it is, like, who wants to start first?
We go the other way around.
I just feel really privileged to have seen how narratives, what people around the world are doing, and how we're really embracing this idea of narratives to drive radical change. And I think it's very powerful, and to the degree that we can really turn this into a tool that we use in all the spaces where everybody in this room works, I think that we can start to really create a sense of a shift, a sense of possibility, and a sense of a quiet revolution, which is really what we need right now.
Thank you.
I would just add that stories are resources, as I've said. They need to be guarded, they need to be protected. I would encourage everybody to think very deeply about talking to reporters that are coming in and wanting to do stories in your communities. But I would also say that it's very important to be supporting the next generation of reporters, indigenous reporters, because we need people in those mainstream spaces, because holding space is a revolutionary act. So we want to get people there, and we want to support them and make sure that they can change those narratives from within.
Thank you.
So I think I'll just kind of build on this. I love this. Empower people to tell their own stories. And the thing I would add to that is for people to see themselves as protagonists in these stories. So often we're portrayed as the victims of things that happen to us, or maybe we're the cheerleaders, or sometimes, best case scenario, we're the beneficiaries of things that happen to us. And what I urge and what I encourage all of us to do as we move forward to share our stories is to see yourself as change makers, to see yourselves as leaders and, people who are in charge of your own destiny. Things don't just happen. We, individuals, every day make things happen. And let's start to tell that story from the perspective of a protagonist.
On my side, I'd say there's enough negativity and negative stories going around in the media or in the world. The challenge I give to you guys is to start looking into positive. Look at positive in everything. I mean, life has negative and positive. Try to gravitate more on the positive side of things. It will change your environment. It will change your narrative. It will make you feel better in anything that you're struggling with or challenges that you are facing. It will just make you a better person. Stay positive.
Hey, it's tough to be number one.
You wrap it up.
So it's such an honor to be on stage with such amazing people, and I had planned something nice to say and powerful to say, but after everyone spoke, I realized that if we can all come together and tell the stories together in a partnership, it will be so amazing. So that's what I would say. Let's work together and change the narrative together, because we all come with different skills and with we all approach it differently, but essentially the goal is the same. That's it.
I would like to say thank you so much for sharing your stories. I believe it's not only me, but also everyone here is empowered by your stories. And I just want to say these words that every story matters. We share, we learn, we change. And I would like to close it with one song as a closing from my tribe. I want to sing this also as my honor and respect to you. Tumpi wayu, lapat wayu, palit ira, tangkuraran, tulak aku, muneng hanyu, kala burung balulaya. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.